And we are live. Thank you all for joining us for this episode of Vanilla SE. My guest today is Ada from
Hello.
Australia. Please tell us something about yourself.
Well, my name's Ada. I'm a 44-year-old transgender woman from Australia. I'm a runner, an athlete. I play roller derby. I've got a teenage son, um, and I know I have a lot of opinions about a lot of things, but I'm an expert in
Mhm.
nothing.
Okay. Yeah, I can relate to that. So you have not told me your claim yet. Do you
No,
have one ready?
I have two ready. And
Okay.
the one, so the one close to it, the one close to my heart is one that we sort of touched on in a previous discussion. So it's the one that I think I probably won't use. Um,
Okay.
um, uh, so the claim that I wanted to talk about most is that
hmm
trans women belong in sports because
Okay.
I'm an athlete, but we've touched on that one
hmm
a little bit before. So
Okay.
the other one that I thought would be interesting to explore is JK Rowling, and
Mm.
uh, JK Rowling is transphobic.
hmm So the claim
And
is
so
is that the claim that JK Rowling is transphobic?
JK Rowling is transphobic. Yeah, so she's expressed transphobic opinions. So, and that's indicative
Okay.
of her being transphobic. So I wasn't
Okay.
sure. It's hard to choose between the two.
That's okay. We might even get to both of them today if we end up putting
Yeah.
one if we end up getting to the one quickly. Does J.K. Rowling's being transphobic affect any choices that you make?
Does it affect any choices I make? No, it doesn't affect choices I make, but I do believe it affects choices that younger trans people and people that are earlier in their journey make.
Okay, so it affects trans people, and okay,
Yes.
that's certainly enough to bring it out. So, for definitional points, uh, J.K. Rowling is, I understand, the author of the Harry Potter series.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, and transphobic statements. What does that mean? What is a transphobic statement?
So, a transphobic statement is a statement that expresses discrimination or bias or bigotry against transgender people and creates associated problems and disadvantage for them.
Okay, I think I might have gotten your claim mistyped. It's not so much that J.K. Rowling has made transphobic statements; it's that she is transphobic because she's made transphobic statements. Is that which is the
Look,
claim that we're addressing?
I would, I believe that what I want to touch on is I want to say
hmm
that she's transphobic, but because it's a known person, because she's a known person, and
hmm
it's a known, um, it might be a bit contentious. So I'm not sure about that, but
hmm
I think
Well,
it's
has
definitely
made these
easier to.
statements is a less contentious thing, and it might
Yes, and
have the same result. So
that
maybe
was
that's the one.
that's what I thought. Is it allows us to talk about what she said rather than her beliefs. So I
Let me
yes.
make sure I type this right. Okay, hopefully I spelled that all correctly. Hit me if I'm incorrect. So, how confident are you that the statements in question that J.K. Rowling has made are transphobic by your definition?
By my definition, I am very confident that they are dog whistles, um,
Okay.
but I'm not necessarily confident that she believes them to be uh, discriminatory. But
Okay.
certainly they qualify for me.
Okay. They qualify for you. If I were to put that on a scale of 100, because that's what I have for my Scaly bot thing, is that easy to come up with a
Yep.
number?
Um, Look, I'm going to go nice and high there and say
Hmm.
90%.
Very good. Okay, so what qualifies as a transphobic statement?
So a transphobic statement is a statement that comes from a position of, or sustains or sustains or creates disadvantage or discrimination for trans people.
Hmm. So phobic means I'm afraid of it. Uh, is that a loose term, or is it very specific? Is that just a loose category? How do we? Is there a distinction between somebody who disagrees about what sex and gender means, but isn't afraid of the conversation, versus somebody who's actually like emotionally reactive and wanting to actually push back on trans people? Is there room in there?
Look, I think there is room in there, but I don't think that fits into the definition of whether it is transphobic or not.
Hmm.
Phobia in the the etymology of the word
Hmm.
is around fear, but
Hmm.
excuse me, but transphobia in the context that I'm talking about is similar to the way homophobia is used, which
Hmm.
is an expression of discomfort or unease. When someone feels a sense of discomfort or unease, or they believe that there is something wrong, a problem
Hmm.
with another person, but they are not necessarily afraid of them in the typical sense, that qualifies for homophobia in that colloquial manner. Um,
Hmm.
Transphobia has the same meaning, well, exists in the same context where it's one of discomfort rather than literal fear.
Okay. So it seems like the definition of transphobia is coming from your own experience. And then, yes? Or is there
Look,
is there a wider external source that you're looking for definition of transphobia?
there is no. Well, there are formal definitions in the
Hmm.
dictionary that allow for my interpretation, but my meaning is more an acceptance of the way the word is colloquially used and
Hmm.
accepted. And that is, I think that many people try and make a distinction rather between the literal interpretation of phobia as fear versus phobia as a form of discomfort or bias. I think it often gets used as a tool in discussions and debates to separate and allow someone to express their ideas whilst telling themselves that what they're doing is okay and is fine. So I think that there is an attempt. Often it is used disingenuously when people claim that it is a position based on fear. I think that
Okay.
for the most part,
So I should
my
not
understanding.
focus at
Sorry.
all on the phobia part, just the against.
Well, I think that there is room to have that discussion because if
Hmm.
my interpretation of phobia and my understanding of phobia is specific to me or the community that I belong to and is not widely accepted in larger society, then yeah, that is my statement would then be one of discrimination rather than phobia,
Hmm.
but in my mind they are the same. So
Okay. So trans discrimination, transphobia, synonyms for the purpose of what we're talking about. Good.
from
Um,
my perspective, yes.
yeah. Now I assume that the statements you're using Twitter as your source because that's I think where she made
Yes.
those
Yeah,
statements.
yes, that's right. Yeah.
And I assume it's a stack of them, not just one. I've seen a few. I don't know if I know all of
Mhm,
them.
mhm.
And what in her statements qualifies?
So early early on, there were statements that I would qualify as dog whistles.
Okay. Yes, please describe dog
And
whistles.
so a dog whistle, in the way I'm using it, is referencing a comment or a symbol or a sign or a statement or a definition that has specific meaning to a group of people, and perhaps also to the group of people that it is used against, but seems innocuous to the larger audience.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Could you identify one of the dog whistles that she used that would have specific meaning, and that
Okay.
other people wouldn't get? Somebody who's not embedded in it, somebody who's not
Yep.
on those polarized sides wouldn't understand.
Yep. So the one that that jumps to mind, the one that started this discussion in a lot of ways, is sex is real.
Sex is real.
Sex is real.
Oh,
Yeah. Right.
I have sex. It's real.
Yeah. Well, and she's talking about sex.
Do we mean
and
sex the verb? Do we mean sex the description of like X and Y and that kind of thing?
So the claim that the context that she uses it in is
Mm-hmm.
that uh, the sexual characteristics we are born with are ultimately are ultimately real, and they impact sexuality, and they people experience attraction or not dependent on their sexual orientation, and they experience particular challenges based on the sexual characteristics that they're born with, due to the way they're perceived, due to their particular biology. So it seems quite an innocuous comment.
It does. Yeah. I mean, on its face, it's as obvious as Black Lives Matter.
Mm.
Yeah,
And
and of course I hear, yeah, but all lives matter, and that seems to be not the accepted answer.
mm,
It seems I'm missing something. When
yeah,
she says sex is real. So, what do you think the dog whistle means to the people polarized on the other side? In this
so
case, this specific one.
in this specific case, the implication is that transgender people are claiming otherwise, that transgender people are don't believe that sex is real. And the other part, the other unspoken meaning in that particular phrase is that sex is unchanging, fixed, and binary,
Mm,
and
mm,
that's where we start to run into definitional issues and problems
hmm
when you start trying to apply that to the transgender experience.
yeah. Okay. I invite any questions from the crowd. Go ahead and ping FK with them, and FK will throw them up on the top. So, what could you learn about, maybe something? What could JK say in the future that would adjust, improve your confidence that what she said was indeed a dog whistle? Could she reinforce this in such a way that would improve your certainty that she actually meant to say that the interpretation that you mentioned would be taken up by the other side?
So there are a couple of ways that she could do that, yes. So some of I think the most obvious one, and this is perhaps the one that there's already a little bit of an indication of, is to
Mm-hmm.
start using other dog whistles commonly associated and grouped
Mm,
with that dog whistle, right, that come from a particular ideology.
mm-hmm.
Um, and they start to have meaning when you see them used together. But within the context of that specific claim, then
Mm-hmm.
yes, I think if she started to elaborate on some of those implicit assumptions that I was referring
Mm-hmm.
to and make them explicit, her
Mm-hmm.
her meaning in that statement would become clearer. And I think that it would become definitively clear as to the meaning that she uses when she uses that term.
Okay. The converse question is, what could she hypothetically say that would make you think that her dog whistles in the past weren't actually trying to bring up those alternative meaning, those
Right.
polarizing
So
meaning?
yeah, so that one would be quite easy, because there is a compatibility that, the statement that sex is real is a claim that trans people don't deny. So
Mm,
acknowledging that that it has an potentially ambiguous meaning, and
hmm
clarifying that the way in which she intended it, which is without those hidden implications that I was referring to. If she
hmm
made statements that made it clear that she did not carry those beliefs that align with those implications, such as the unchanging nature of sex,
hmm
of physical sexual characteristics, um, then that would make me change my belief around meaning and the way she used the term.
hmm Okay, let's see. Okay, I'm going to back out just for a moment.
Time for a coffee.
Happy reset. How refreshing. Okay. Uh,
Welcome back. I enjoyed a coffee while you were gone.
good, good, good. Uh, okay, so I hear a question. Could JK Rowling have made transphobic statements in good faith, not being aware of trans struggles and merely following mainstream culture, just repeating things she heard other people say and thought, yeah, that's reasonable, so I'll say it.
Um, Absolutely. And that's the space that my
hmm
90% versus 100% exists in,
hmm
is in exactly that belief that um, that she holds a particular set of beliefs that is very clear,
hmm
and those particular set of beliefs have harmful impacts on the experience of trans people. However, I do believe that it's possible that she not disagrees even with
hmm
the impact, but she just does not see the harmful impact of her words.
Ah, she
And
doesn't know how much power she has. I
that
see.
that's right. And more than that, she thinks that she's doing something beneficial and helpful.
Oh,
Um, right.
okay.
So there is absolutely a possibility that she made the statements. So let me clarify. So I
Yeah, go ahead.
think I think that she did make the statements in good faith, but she made
Mm,
the statements in good faith with the goal of protecting and fighting for the rights of women.
okay.
The distinction being that in my understanding of her worldview is
hmm
that trans women are not women, and thus her
Okay.
statements don't apply to trans women, because she sees trans women as a threat to the
Okay.
experience of women. And so, in that space, yes, there is absolutely room for her comments to have been made in good faith,
hmm
without an awareness of the impact it has on trans people,
Okay.
but focused on the benefit that she sees for women. I personally
Okay.
believe that she is aware of the impact it has on the experience of trans people, but it's certainly possible that she is not.
Okay. So J.K. Rowling is working for the goals of cis women, and
Yes.
because of the way she sees women, she's to a degree working against the goals of trans women. And I assume working against the goals of trans men, just because by denoting cis as the proper thing in her perspective, she's just saying anti-trans kind of thing. Maybe the
No,
question of
actually,
whether trans men. No, well, do tell.
no. So the the it's not actually the divide based on cis and trans. The divide is on the sex and gender we were assigned at birth. So
Okay.
it is almost an invalidation of the idea of gender to be
Oh, a
focused
gender being
on.
separate from sex.
Yes, but yeah, so
Yes.
gender being separate from sex in the way I'm using it, but that I
Yes.
think is a claim that she would disagree with, and she would say
Okay.
that gender and sex are the same thing. So in that context, I believe she is inclusive of trans men because she sees
Yes.
them as female at birth and thus belonging to the group of people that she talks about. However, she would disagree with their claim that they are
Oh.
men, but she would include
Oh,
them.
so she would be fighting for the rights of trans women because they are. I'm sorry, trans men because she thinks they are women.
Yes, exactly.
Interesting.
That's my
Okay. Okay.
understanding. That's my understanding of her position, and it's certainly a common certainly a common belief out there amongst
Yeah.
people that are exclusive
Yeah. A
of
lot of
trans
people think so.
rights.
hmm Um, I see. I see a weird kind of alternative where a well-meaning, articulate opponent can actually be an advantage to my side because I can get oxygen to an argument that otherwise people wouldn't be having. That in some twisted way, she might be an ally to trans because she's bringing up the subject and is willing to be a bit of a punching bag. I'm not saying I want to support,
Mm.
although I'm not saying I want to not for JK specifically. It seems like the kind of communication she's doing is the kind I would be interested in having a conversation with. And
Yes,
that
yes.
so if we have these conversations, should we expect that it's going to be better for trans rights?
In this instance, no. And
No.
I think I think so let me clarify
hmm
that. Having this level of conversation as an active dialogue with her,
hmm
with the publicity that her statements have made, I think
Yes.
probably could be a good thing. However, that's not
Okay.
what is happening. What is
Oh.
actually happening is that her statements are being made without the corresponding perspectives, and her statements are having an impact because people they make intuitive sense, right? Like sex is real. Of course, sex is real. And
Yeah.
in saying that and in doing that, there is no dialogue. So the
Mm.
harm is being done because of the visibility of these comments, but
Okay.
the advantage that would exist in a dialogue, I think, yes, in theory it's real, but in practice it's not what's happening.
Okay. Um, in terms of the SE, in terms of the Elenchus, I think I've gotten to understand your claim, and I understand your reasons for believing the claim. Most of them have to
Hmm.
do with the consensus of the colloquial term for transphobia and what
Hmm.
dog whistles are and mean. And the claim is somewhat modest in that we're just saying that she has made transphobic statements.
Hmm.
We haven't said, and this makes her a bad person, or you shouldn't listen to
Mm.
JK, or whatever. I don't know.
Mm.
Uh, uh, so, do you think that I've heard your position clearly? Do you think I
Yes,
understand? Okay.
I would agree with that.
Uh,
Yes.
okay. Good. I'd like to open it up to the room then. Mute. Unmute everybody. So, if somebody has questions on the topic or feedback about the Elenchus, uh, you're welcome to unmute and voice it for yourself.
And
And if
I
you
would
would
just
rather,
add,
go ahead.
I would just add that, yes, I agree that it is on the face, it is a modest claim. But it's very hard to have this discussion without pointing the fingers at specific people and trying to read their intent. And that's something that I didn't want to necessarily bring into this discussion. But it also allows, I think it's less modest than it seems at face value because of the presence of those dog whistles.
Okay. Let's see.
Hi.
If anybody wants to type, go ahead.
Yes.
Go ahead, Corporal.
You guys know me. So I
Yes.
think regarding specifically JK Rowling, I think her statements were extra damaging, and I wrote this in the text chat. Her statement is more damaging coming from her historically being a progressive than a conservative, because it does give her a sort of air of credibility that, okay, this is a progressive person who has been progressive historically on pretty much all subjects except for this one. Now that must mean something. And following that, there was tons of videos coming from right-wing demagogues saying this is their left in fighting, and as soon as you disagree with the dogma of the left, they are going after your salary in your throat. I think so. I think in general, she did much more damage to the conversation than a conservative would have done, given the same statement.
Ada, were you able to hear Corporal clearly?
Yes, so I would, I guess I'm trying to come up with an answer that is more than, yes, I agree, because I think that's an accurate summary of the of the situation. As I said, I think that you do raise a very interesting point that a dialogue at that level could actually be quite a positive. Well, it could have positive impacts, but the way it was carried out, coming from someone with the history and visibility and the political positioning and the narrative that is through her books, yes, I think that does make it more harmful. So I can't disagree with that one. I can't sort of expand on it really even.
Okay. Well,
I got a question. I was just scanning. Like I know the controversy. I just didn't know exactly what she was saying. So while you guys were talking, I was just scanning some quick articles. And in one of the articles, it was mentioned that she is a rape and like a sexual assault victim, survivor.
Yes,
and
yes, she is.
But it seems like the people are quick to dismiss that. But I'm just trying to, like, being a cisgender man, I can never really experience anything that yourself or she has gone through, but so I can only intellectually analyze it. And I would imagine if someone were to go through the type of things that she's gone through, and she has been a vocal advocate for women's rights, mainly based on her past. A lot of the people will take their causes and add it to their identity. So they are, they're not just, an advocate, they're a ex-advocate. So it's hard to remove their identity from the cause. Would you, like, when it comes to could you see it as her, like, so she's looking at it in a binary way, man versus woman, and she's been, the women's rights movement is, 50, 60, 70 years old. So I'm just trying to how to phrase this so it doesn't sound accusational or anything like that. Could you understand that some people in the women's rights movement, with trans rights being so new compared to the rest of the movements of gay rights, women's rights, racial rights and so like that. When compared to those, trans rights is very new. Would it be understandable for someone to almost see it as someone else trying to hook their wagon to their train?
I think you have hit on exactly why this whole discussion exists and why it's not clear cut. It's why there is a hesitation around the inclusion of trans women like myself, and that is for exactly that perspective, that the women like myself, whether someone sees us as not actually being women, or even if they see us as women, but women who were raised and socialized with the experience that men have, I think there is absolutely a space in there for people to have well-meaning intentions and focus on the goal of cis women, and see not harm to trans people, but to see trans people as coming from a position of male privilege that creates harm for cis women from that position of ignorant privilege. I think there is absolutely space for that, and a lot of people probably do fit into that category. However, I guess my real counter to that is that the impact that it has on trans people is real, and that needs to be part of the discussion when people make those statements. So I think it is possible to hold what amount to transphobic perspectives from a position of desire to do good in the world.
Yeah, I could totally see that. It's the idea that you see yourself, or you are a woman, and you're being excluded because of what some doctor said that you are at birth. Because it's the sexual selection at birth is pretty much, it's fairly subjective. It's almost arbitrary. You've got someone of authority basically telling you who you are before you even have a say in it. Right?
I'd agree with that.
Yeah, and but because it's like the trans rights versus women's rights, this isn't new, because I know when the gay rights movement was coming up, they met a lot of resistance from Black rights. I know a lot of, because there is a lot of in some, it has been said, I'm not going to say it, but it has been said that in some Black culture, homophobia is rampant. And so when you had the gay rights trying to attach themselves to, the Black rights movement, they got a lot of kickback, because and it's almost like it is tribalism. It's you have a lot of people that are attaching their identity to a certain movement, and then if anyone comes along and tries to like I said, hook their wagon to their train, that they almost see it as diluting the thing. So I'm not saying it's right, but I can understand it.
I would agree, and I would say that is the space that that 10%, 90% versus 10%. That's the space that it lives in. I think in my understanding of the position that that JK Rowling has is that it's not purely that. I think it is more than that. However, I don't know that, and I could be wrong. I can talk more concretely about the particular statements and the impact of those statements, though, than her intent.
Yeah. So I had a couple of typed questions. One was to me, could I restate the definition of dog whistle? So here's my quick try. A dog whistle is a statement that is not obviously controversial to the general population and has special impact, meaning, and reinforcement of extreme positions, especially those that are unpopular to express in public. Does that seem right?
Mm-hmm. That seems right. The only thing that I would add to that definition is that the meaning is often to the body of people who hold those more extreme beliefs, but also that meaning is often quite visible and understood by the target of those beliefs.
Okay.
And that's
so both sides of the polarization can see it.
Yes,
But the
yes.
people in the
Whereas
middle don't. Okay.
Yes, exactly, and that's not always the case.
Good
but
addition.
It often
Thank you
is.
for that. And then the question from Dio type: how do we establish the presence of dog whistles? That might.
How do we establish the existence of dog whistles? That is hard by nature. The dog whistles by design almost are designed to be passed off as innocuous, and that makes it really, really hard to pin a dog whistle on someone, because they can always say, well, that's not what I meant, or that's quite clearly, a statement of the obvious truth, because the power of a dog whistle comes in the form of the implications and secondary meaning attached to it. And because those are not made explicit, it's very hard to touch on them. The way typically that they are seen is through the context of the people making them, and they come with other dog whistles and other beliefs and other statements, and they are part of a bigger ideology. And when you can show that pattern, it becomes, when you can say that this dog whistle has a bunch of layered meaning that is not obvious, and those layered meanings happen to align with a series of other statements and beliefs held by that group of people, then that's where you can establish the existence of them. But even so, it's by design, you can't pin anything on them. And like here in Australia, where I live, there was a big billboard up that had woman, noun, adult, female adult human, right? And that's another dog whistle. That's the definition of woman. How is the definition of woman a dog whistle? How can you argue with the definition of a woman? Well, the implication in there is that trans women are not female, and thus are not adult human females, and thus are not women, right? But that's not stated. All you're doing is literally giving the dictionary definition of woman. Now, I'm not claiming that I don't believe JK Rowling has made that particular statement. I might be wrong. But it is the example that that particular exact definition is often used in the space of people who are exclusive of transgender inclusion and rights. And that's where it becomes an obvious dog whistle. Well, obvious to the target group anyway.
Thank you. Another written question. What actions do you think should be taken based on your claim about JK Rowling's statement?
Oh, that's a good question. I think that the benefit of that is it's creating the opportunity for discussions and exploration of her ideas, and but I don't. Am I allowed to say I don't know? Because
Yes,
I
you're
think
definitely allowed in SE to
yeah.
say you don't know.
Yes, because
It's encouraged.
there has been a social response to her statements, and a polarizing of people's people's perspective on her, and I think that is probably the action that needed to happen, because I think the framework for a stronger response doesn't exist, because if it did, the statement wouldn't exist in the first place. I think the statement can only exist because someone in her position is able to hold that perspective and not face serious. I mean, she's faced social consequences, but not serious social consequences for that. So yeah, that's a lot of words to say I don't know.
I have a question.
Yes, go ahead.
So I was curious, earlier in the discussion you said that that one of the implications of her tweeting out that sex isn't real is that transgender people don't believe that sex is real. Was that what you said?
Yeah, yes.
She
Okay.
tweeted that sex is real, not that it
Oh
isn't.
yeah, sorry. That
Yeah,
sex is
so
real.
yeah, so
And so my question was, do you do you think that she's completely strawmanning the trans community, or are there people out there who think that sex isn't real, or that maybe sex isn't important, or whatever she was trying to imply? Or do you think that she's completely making up an opponent?
somewhere between the two. She is trying to create a dichotomy where the reality is that argument for a dichotomy is not the one that is being made. However, it is absolutely fair to say that the trans community at large probably is diluting and trying to challenge the definition of sex that she uses. So, to expand on that, the statement of sex is real, typically the implication in that is that it is unchanging as well, right? And that's where people like myself challenge that meaning, right? So most people who use the statement sex is real mean that the implication is that I'm male and always will be because I was assigned male at birth. Whereas, and I'm specifically talking about sex here rather than gender identity, right? So I know JK Rowling has and does genuinely see and respect the right of trans people to use pronouns and be respected in the use of pronouns, etc. But that experience of sex is, I think, when you look at someone like myself, I have gone through multiple surgeries. I've been on hormone replacement, and in terms of my physical characteristics, male is not an accurate description of my physiology. I mean, I would argue that sure, female isn't necessarily an accurate label either, but that's the dichotomy. If the label that I use myself when describing my sex is transgender female.
Okay.
I describe myself as a woman without the transgender context. I am both a woman and a transgender woman. Both of those statements are true.
Got it.
However, I describe myself as a transgender female without describing myself as female without qualification, because I don't believe that I fall into that category. But it's equally incorrect to attribute my sexual characteristics as male. And that is the space where this discussion happens, because the claim, my understanding of the claim is that by saying I'm not male, the sex is real perspective is that I'm challenging and trying to erase the idea of sex by simply saying I'm not male. Whereas my actual perspective is a little bit more nuanced than that. And that's where the discussion happens in that space.
So just one follow-up, just to clarify, because I think I understand better now. Like, you're saying that her idea of, like, her classic idea of what sex is, you think that the trans community actually does disagree that that is real, that particular definition that she has?
I wouldn't use real. I would say that we disagree with the idea that it is static and unchanging. Like that's the part that that the real disagreement happens from, because I was, the term that is used in the transgender community is assigned male at birth, right? And I was. I grew up most of my life with traditionally male sexual characteristics. And that's real. Absolutely real. It was accurate to call me male in that context, in the context of sexual characteristics, especially before I came out of the closet. But the implication that because I was born male, I will always be best described by the label male is the bit that I would challenge, and the bit that she would see as, or the bit that statement typically, that's where the bone of that definition comes from. So I was a bit all over the place with that one, but I hope that makes sense.
No, thank you.
No,
I
that's fine.
definitely
That's
understand now.
Another written question, does fair treatment of trans women require a specific view of sex?
Ooh. Yes and no. If you... Okay, no, I'm going to say yes, right? It's not an encompassing view of sex, but it involves an acknowledgement that trans... Oh, it's hard. That's a nuanced question. That's hard to answer. So I think the challenge with this question for me is that when we see sex segregated spaces, right, and sex segregated, access to resources and the like. If it's segregated by sex, then yes, it does require a specific view of the sex of transgender women. It requires the perspective that transgender women, whatever definition you use of transgender women's sex, it has to be compatible with female spaces. So I would agree that yes, it does require a specific view in that context. However, a lot of spaces we use that they're sex segregated spaces, but in practice they're gender segregated spaces, and those spaces don't necessarily require a specific view of sex. But I would argue that probably in reality, yes, it does require that you don't see transgender women as male, at the very least. I think that broadly is true.
Thank you. Redding, you have a question to voice?
Yeah, so I just need to make a little statement to kind of put so you know where I'm coming from. And if I say anything that comes that sounds offensive, please forgive me. But okay, so the difference between sex and gender is a very muddled thing. I think the closest that you can really get to an understanding is looking at the medical community and how they see sex and gender. So, like what was discussed, sex sex isn't male or female, because especially when you include DSDs. For those who don't know, it's differently sexually development is what DSD stands for. So you can have a 46XX that is in all appearance male, and you can have a 46XY that if you look at them, they're completely female. So it's just all up in the air. And then with gender, it even adds a little bit more, smog to the conversation, because we don't know exactly how gender is formed in a person. There's some clues that it may be linked to genetics, it may be linked to hormones, it could be, and then it could be the environment is adding a little spice to it. So when it comes to statements like JK Rowling's, where she is confounding sex and gender, and everyone is throwing these terms around, and everyone has their own different definitions, it's showing to be a very convoluted conversation. Do you think? Okay, well, if we could nail down a better definition, or if we can nail down the contributors to gender, not sex, gender, do you think that will help the whole conversation? Or do you think this whole entire subject is just so nuanced that the majority of people are just never going to get it?
I don't think that I agree that the majority of people will never get it. However, I do think that we'll probably never see a agreed upon definition. I don't think we'll ever see a widely accepted consensus of what sex entails and what it doesn't, and where the boundaries lay, and the differentiation between sex and gender. I don't think we will ever get a complete consensus on that, because it's too nuanced. But I think that is probably a result of trying to force binary descriptors onto something that resists binary descriptors, and I think that's a fault of that particular framework that we try and discuss sex in. So I mean, sure, in a society 100 years removed from now, maybe that's different, but certainly within my lifetime, we're not going to be peeling apart we're not going to be peeling apart those binaries in any meaningful way. So I don't think that we will ever reach any kind of consensus on those topics. I think these discussions have to be guided by a recognition and acceptance of subjective experiences, and a sort of a do no harm philosophy. And I think that's where we're going to, if we're going to gain ground, that's where it's going to exist, not through trying to clarify the nuances of who is and isn't a particular sex. Does that answer that question?
Hope. Redding, were you answered well enough?
Yeah, I'm just trying to limit myself, because I could probably take over the conversation for the next hour.
That's okay.
But I'm not going to.
I really, really hope you're wrong. I am writing a book about the future in which it is consensus and it's all dealt with. So if you're right, then my future is wrong that I'm writing a book about. But
how far in the future do you do you think? I mean, now I'm turning the questions back on you, but
The book happens from 100 to 300 years from the founding of the city on Mars. So
all right.
it's
I
you know,
would I
a
would agree
ways.
that yeah, I would agree that that sort of timescale, a multi-generational timescale,
Okay.
then yeah, I think that is absolutely, we might see a change in that space. But like my son or even my grandson, I don't think, well, if I have a grandson, my son or any grandchildren that I have probably won't see that come to fruition completely.
Is there any phenomenon in reality that is best understood as a binary?
Um, can I give a cheap answer and say binary
Sure,
star
of course.
systems? But like, uh,
That's not a yes no. That's not the kind of binary we mean.
no, I know. That's why it's a cheap answer. Um,
Very
um,
witty.
is there any reality that is best understood, any phenomenon in reality that is best understood as a binary? And look, offhand, I can't think of any. I think this idea that this idea of bimodal distribution, I think most things that are described by a binary are perhaps better described by a bimodal distribution. And what I
Okay.
mean by that is if you have a look at a distribution graph, you know, the little curve like that shows the possibility of a particular phenomena occurring or the range across which it occurs, and it is a measure of the statistical distribution of those attributes. A bimodal distribution is one where there are two waves that sit sort of beside each other and can overlap to some extent or not overlap, but either way, it's not a clear-cut binary in the same way. I think there are many systems that are best understood that way.
So you're on the side of the quantum theorists and not the classical physicists. Okay.
Yes, I am.
Yeah. Okay, we are up on an hour. This has been fascinating. I totally want to have you back in the future. You know how to get a hold of my calendar, right, Ada?
I
I
do.
would love
Yes.
to have you back on the other topic, the other claim, or a
Yes.
different
Yes.
one.
Yeah.
You're a delight to speak to, and I want you here.
I'd
Uh,
love to.
so telling everybody else, Ada is a fellow staff member of mine on a Discord called the Chessboard, of which Corvo is an important leader of.
Oh,
And
stuff.
that's yeah. Well, you're an important leader of. I mean, how that's fine, right? Anyway,
Shut up and take it, Corvo.
yeah. Shut up and take it.
I'm blushing.
Good. Anyway, I'll have an invite to the chessboard in the doobly-doo. On the chessboard on Sundays, I do an SE theory and practice event each week. So that's where our connection came in. That's where I got to meet these wonderful people. Is there anything else that you would like to tell me or tell my audience before I close, Ada?
I want to say that those sessions that you run were my introduction to SE, and that has been opened up a whole delightful new world. So I look forward to. So my area of interest and the thing that I can talk strongly about is transgender issues, and I talk about those in these contexts because they create such fascinating discussions that people are interested in. But I honestly look forward to having in one of those more informal sessions, having you tease apart some issues that aren't so important in the big picture that represent my beliefs, because that's such a fascinating thing to see those ideas explored. And I thank you for introducing me to this world.
I'm very willing to do that. As much SE as you see me do in public, I do at least that much in DMs and in private conversations as well. So I'm very open to people coming to me and talking to me. And it is a little bit different. Here we have time frames, we have guests, we have this. And in the other case, I'm much slower and more listening. So it's good. thank you all for coming to the show. I wouldn't do this without you. I couldn't do this without you. I really appreciate my guests and all of my audience who's participating, everybody who asked questions. That's very helpful to the show. Here is a list of my favorite. It's not necessarily my favorite 5, probably is, might be. I actually have a longer list on my website, but this is what fit on the screen for my list of street epistemology related YouTube channels. Oh my, now he's going to talk. And now we have the on streetepistemology.com. This is one of my favorite references, places for sorry, this is provided by Street Epistemology International and is a really good place where we've collected resources that the community has built regarding street epistemology, including a complete guide and blogs and all sorts of neat things. So go to streetepistemology.com if you want to understand more about how to and where to and when to street epistemology. Thank you all for coming to this session of Vanilla Street Epistemology and my rooster. If you would like to be a guest on my show, I really look forward to